She pulled her horse to a sudden stop when she saw the flowers, and the man behind the fence didn't move to greet her, like he was waiting to see whether she'd ride away or step into something she couldn't undo. The wind cut low across the field, bending the colors like fire along the fence, and Evelyn kept her hand on the reins a second longer than she needed to. Behind her, the road stretched empty. Ahead, the gate stood open just enough to be an invitation, or a warning. A man near the barn set down his axe and watched, not calling out, not stepping closer. She could still turn back. She knew that. But she didn't. And somehow, that choice already felt like it was going to cost her something. Would you have kept riding? Or stopped right there? The land had been the same for 3 days straight. Dry, flat, and stretched so wide it felt like it had forgotten what it was supposed to grow. The wind moved low across the prairie, lifting dust instead of grass. It settled into Evelyn Brooks's coat, her sleeves, the seams of her gloves. By the time the sun leaned west, everything she owned carried a thin layer of the territory. She didn't slow her horse. There wasn't any reason to. The town of Red Hollow sat somewhere ahead, and she had a letter folded inside her coat with her name written clean across the front. A bookkeeping job. A room above an office. Enough to start again without asking anyone's permission. Duchess kept her pace steady. The mare's hooves made a dull, tired sound against the packed earth. No birds. No water. Just wind and distance. Evelyn shifted in the saddle, rolling one shoulder, then the other. She had learned not to count miles. Counting made the road longer. It was the color that stopped her, not movement, not sound. Color. At first she thought it was a trick of the light, the sun catching something along the ridge ahead. But as she crested the rise, the ground changed beneath her eyes. A strip of color ran along a fence line like someone had laid out a ribbon across the land. Red and orange first, then yellow, then a scatter of purple that stood taller than the rest. It didn't belong to this place. It looked like it had been dropped there by mistake. Evelyn pulled Duchess to a halt. The mare shifted, grateful for it, lowering her head as if the stop had been her idea all along. Evelyn didn't dismount. She just sat there, hands resting loose on the reins, watching the way the wind moved through the flowers. They bent together, not breaking, not scattering. The sound was soft, not like grass, something lighter, something that didn't match the rest of the valley. She had passed 6 ranches since morning, all of them the same. Brown fields, fences leaning under their own weight, cattle standing shoulder to shoulder like they had nowhere else to be. No one planted flowers out here. Not like this. Evelyn let out a slow breath and told herself it was simple. A ranch meant water. A well meant she could fill her canteen without rationing the last inch. That was reason enough. She turned Duchess toward the fence. The closer she got, the stranger it looked. The flowers weren't scattered. They were placed. Rows that curved just enough to follow the land. Not wild, not careless. Someone had decided this. She slipped down from the saddle near the gate, looping the reins over the top rail. The wood felt warm under her palm, worn smooth where hands had used it often. The yard beyond sat quiet in that afternoon stillness that meant work had already been done or was waiting for later. A dog lay stretched across the porch, brown and white, one ear bent wrong. It lifted its head just enough to see her, then set it back down again, as if she didn't require attention. From behind the barn came the steady crack of an axe. Evelyn walked toward the sound. Each step took her farther from the road and deeper into something she hadn't planned to step into at all. The air felt different here. Not cooler, not cleaner, just held, like the place had a boundary the rest of the prairie didn't. She rounded the corner of the barn. He was already mid-swing when she saw him. The axe came down clean through a split log, the two halves falling apart without resistance. He didn't rush the next swing. He set his stance again, lifted, and brought it down the same way. Efficient. No wasted motion. He wasn't the biggest man she had seen in the territory, but he carried his height in a way that made him seem larger than the space around him. Broad through the shoulders, sleeves rolled to the elbows, forearms marked with the fine cuts and scars of work done without gloves. He paused before she spoke, not startled, just aware. Then he turned. His eyes found her first, steady and quiet, like he had expected someone to be there eventually. He didn't step forward, didn't close the distance, just rested the axe head against the woodpile and waited. "Afternoon," he said. His voice matched the rest of him, low, used, but not worn out. "Afternoon," Evelyn answered. "I was riding through, saw your place." She nodded once toward the field behind her, like that explained everything it needed to. His gaze shifted past her shoulder for a second, landing somewhere out there among the color. Then it came back. "You need water," he said. It wasn't a question. "If it's not trouble." He shook his head once, already turning. "East side of the barn. Trough's there. Well's just past it." He didn't walk with her. He pointed, then stepped aside, giving her the space to go without following. Evelyn hesitated a second longer than necessary, then nodded. "Thank you." She found the trough where he said it would be. Duchess drank deep, the sound of it loud in the quiet yard. Evelyn worked the rope on the well, the bucket scraping softly as it dropped and rose again, heavy with cold water. She drank standing there, one hand braced against the wood frame. The water tasted like it had come from somewhere that hadn't seen the sun in years. Clean, steady. When she set the cup down, she could feel him again before she saw him. He hadn't come close. He stood a few steps back, near the barn door, hands resting loose at his sides, watching without staring. "Long ride," he said. "Pueblo," she answered. 3 days. He nodded once, like that told him enough. "Town's another hour," he said. "You'll make it before dark." "I plan to." A small pause settled between them. Not empty, just unfilled. Evelyn wiped her hands on her skirt, then glanced once more toward the field. The wind had shifted slightly, and the red flowers moved like a low fire along the fence. "You plant all that?" she asked. Something in his face changed. Not much, just enough to mark the question as something that mattered. "Most," he said. "Some came up on their own." She waited, but he didn't add anything to it. "That's a lot of land for flowers," she said. He looked past her again, eyes narrowing slightly against the light. "Land doesn't mind what you ask of it," he said, "only whether you keep asking." Evelyn held his gaze a moment longer than she meant to. Then she nodded, like she understood something she couldn't quite name. She gathered the reins and swung back into the saddle. Duchess shifted under her, ready to move. "Thank you," she said again. He dipped his head once, no smile, no expectation of anything more. Evelyn turned the mare toward the gate. She rode out onto the road and didn't look back right away. But when she did, it wasn't the man she saw first. It was the color. And she watched it a second too long before she nudged the horse forward again. The wind closed in behind her, carrying dust back over the road, but the image stayed where it had settled, somewhere just under her ribs. A field that didn't belong. A man who didn't explain it. And a silence that followed her farther than it should have. She kept riding, but the road didn't feel the same anymore. The dust still rose behind Duchess in the same dull clouds, The wind still pressed against Evelyn's back with the same steady hand. Nothing in the land had changed. Not the color, not the distance. But something had shifted in the way she noticed it. By the time Red Hollow came into view, the sun had dropped low enough to throw long shadows across the buildings. The town sat close to the river bend, a handful of wooden fronts, a feed store, a blacksmith, and the freight office with its wide double doors already open to the evening air. Evelyn rode straight through to the hitching rail without pausing. She tied Duchess, loosened the cinch, then stood for a moment, with one hand resting on the saddle horn, feeling the road still humming in her legs. Inside, the office smelled like paper, ink, and stale coffee. Harold Finch stood behind a cluttered desk, sleeves rolled unevenly, a pencil tucked behind one ear. He looked up once when she stepped in, then again, slower, taking her in properly the second time. "You the one with the letter?" he asked. Evelyn reached into her coat and set it on the desk. "I am." He didn't open it right away. He looked at her first, like he was trying to decide whether the letter would matter. Then he broke the seal and read it through without comment. When he finished, he folded it once, neat, and set it aside. "You ever kept freight books?" he asked. "For 4 years," she said. "Weights, routes, contracts." He pushed a ledger toward her without another word. "Show me." Evelyn stepped closer, setting her gloves down beside the book. The pages were crowded, numbers stacked unevenly, margins ignored, entries squeezed in where they fit. Not dishonest, just careless. She picked up the pencil from the desk, turned it once in her fingers, and began. She didn't rush. She didn't explain. She simply corrected what needed correcting. Shifted a column. Rewrote a line. Balanced a figure that had been off by less than $1, but had been wrong all the same. Finch watched her for a while, then moved around to the other side of the desk to see it from her angle. "You always this particular?" he asked. "When it matters," she said. He gave a short nod, almost to himself. "Room's upstairs. You start in the morning." That was all. By nightfall, Evelyn had a key in her hand and a narrow bed waiting above the office. The room was plain, one window facing the river, a wash basin in the corner, a chair that leaned slightly to the left if you didn't sit square. She unpacked what she needed and left the rest in her trunk. The town settled early. Voices faded. Boots on the boardwalk slowed, then stopped. Somewhere down the street, a piano played 3 wrong notes and then went quiet. Evelyn sat on the edge of the bed and unlaced her boots. When she lay back, the ceiling above her was still unfamiliar. But it wasn't the ceiling she saw. It was color. It didn't belong there. Not in a room like this. Not in a place like Red Hollow. But it sat behind her eyes just the same, bright and out of place. She turned onto her side and closed them. Morning came with the sound of wagons and the smell of coffee drifting up from below. Work filled the hours the way she expected it would. Steady. Clean. Numbers that made sense if you gave them enough attention. By midday, she had found 3 errors in shipments that had already been paid, and one driver who had been undercharging himself for months without noticing. Finch said nothing when she pointed it out. He only scratched a note on a scrap of paper and tucked it into his pocket. By the 3rd day, people had started to notice her. Not directly, not openly, but the way they paused half a second longer at the door, the way they glanced at the desk before speaking. Measuring. On Saturday afternoon, 2 men leaned against the counter waiting for Finch to return from the yard. They spoke low, but not low enough. "That her?" one asked. "That's the one," the other said. "Keeps the books now." A pause. "Finch's business," the first said. "But I wouldn't trust numbers done by someone who ain't worked a herd." Evelyn didn't look up. She finished the line she was on, closed the ledger, and turned the next page. Numbers didn't argue. They didn't care who wrote them down. They only cared whether they were right. Sunday came without instruction. No deliveries, no ledgers, no reason to sit at the desk. Evelyn rose later than usual, washed, dressed, and stood by the window with her coffee cooling in her hand. The road ran south out of town. She told herself she would ride to stretch Duchess's legs. Nothing more. The air carried a little more warmth than it had a few days before. The ground still held the memory of winter, but it was beginning to give. She rode past the last building without slowing. The land opened up again. Brown, flat, familiar. Until it wasn't. The color met her at the same place along the ridge. Evelyn didn't stop this time. She rode straight to the gate and swung down in one motion, looping the reins without looking at her hands. The dog lifted its head again, then thumped its tail once against the porch. Around the barn, the sound of metal on wire carried sharp and clear. Gideon stood at the fence line, a pair of pliers in his hand, pulling a strand tight between two posts. The wire sang under the tension. He didn't turn right away. He finished what he was doing first, set the twist, checked it once more with a firm pull. Then he looked up. "Miss Brooks," he said. She hadn't told him her name. Evelyn leaned one shoulder against the post, arms folded loosely. "I don't remember giving you that." "You did," he said. "Just not to me." She watched him a second, then nodded once. "Word travels." "It does." A small silence settled between them. Not uncomfortable. Just there. He went back to the wire, tightening the next section without hurry. "You come for water again?" he asked. "No." He glanced up once, then back to his hands. "All right." Evelyn shifted her weight, eyes following the line of the fence, then drifting past it to the field beyond. The colors were different in the morning light. Sharper, less forgiving. "I wanted to see if it looked the same," she said. "Does it?" She considered that. "No." He gave a faint nod, like that answered something he hadn't asked out loud. Evelyn pushed off the post and walked a few steps closer, stopping short of where he stood. The wire hummed again as he pulled it tight. "You ever get tired of people asking about it?" she said. "The flowers?" "Yes." He worked the pliers once more before answering. "People don't usually ask," he said. She let that sit. The wind moved through the field again, carrying that same soft sound across the yard. Evelyn reached out without thinking, fingers brushing the wire. Gideon's hand moved before she felt the sting. He caught her wrist lightly, not tight enough to hurt, just enough to stop her. "Careful," he said. "It'll take skin off quicker than you expect." She looked down at his hand, then up at his face. He released her at once, stepping back that same half step he always seemed to keep. He picked up a pair of worn gloves from the post and held them out, not looking at her while he did it. "If you're going to touch things," he said, "use these." Evelyn took them. They were too big for her hands. She didn't give them back. Instead, she pulled them on, one finger at a time, and rested her hand against the wire again, this time with the leather between her skin and the metal. Gideon watched that, quiet. Neither of them said anything for a while. The work went on, the wind moved, the field held its color, and somewhere between the fence line and the flowers, something settled that hadn't been there before. Not spoken, not named, but not nothing. Evelyn stayed longer than she meant to. When she finally stepped back toward the gate, the gloves still on her hands, she paused once more, looking out across the field. "You don't explain it," she said. Gideon set the pliers down, resting his hands on the top of the post. "No," he said. "Why?" He looked out at the flowers, not at her. "Doesn't need explaining," he said. Evelyn nodded slowly. Then she pulled the gloves off and set them on the post where he could reach them. "I'll bring them back next time," she said. Gideon didn't correct her. He just gave a small, almost invisible nod. Evelyn mounted up and turned Duchess toward the road. This time, when she rode away, she didn't look back right away. She didn't need to. She already knew what was there, and somehow that made the distance feel shorter than it had before. The days settled into a rhythm that looked ordinary from the outside. Morning light through the office window, ink drying on ledger pages, the scrape of a chair across wooden floors. Evelyn worked with her sleeves rolled just enough to keep the cuffs clean, her hair pinned back tight so it wouldn't fall forward when she leaned over the books. Harold Finch stopped checking her work after the second week. Not because he trusted easily, because there wasn't anything left to correct. By mid-April, the ledgers sat straighter, columns lined up, weights matched receipts without needing explanation. Drivers came in expecting arguments and left with quiet nods instead. Word traveled. It always did. So did the talk. Evelyn heard it in pieces. At the feed store. At the edge of the saloon when she passed by without going in. On the boardwalk when men thought she'd already walked far enough away. "She's quick with numbers. Numbers ain't cattle. Finch'll learn." She didn't answer any of it. She just kept the books clean. On Tuesdays, wagons came in heavy with freight from the north route. Dust covered everything. Men stepped down stiff from long rides, boots striking the ground like they needed to prove something after being in the saddle too long. That was the day Gideon came into town. The first time, Evelyn didn't notice him right away. He stood near the back wall of the office, hat in his hands, waiting his turn like anyone else. But there was something about the way the room shifted around him. Not fear, not respect exactly, just space. People gave him more of it than they needed to. When she looked up, their eyes met for a second. He didn't nod, didn't step forward, just waited. Evelyn finished the entry in front of her, closed the ledger, and slid it aside. "Next," she said. He stepped up. "Feed order," he said, setting a folded paper on the desk. His handwriting was steady, clean, no wasted marks. Evelyn read it once, then reached for the ledger. "You've got a balance from last month," she said. "I know. You want to clear it now?" He shook his head once. "Next delivery." She marked it down, then turned the book so he could see. "Sign here." He did. No hesitation. When he handed the pencil back, his fingers brushed the edge of the page, not hers. "Road holding?" she asked, almost without thinking. He looked at her then, properly. "Depends where you ride," he said. She nodded. "It usually does." A small pause. Then he picked up his receipt and stepped away. No more than that. But the room felt different after he left. By early May, the air changed, warmer, heavier. Storms rolled in from the west in the late afternoon, quick and loud, leaving the ground dark and smelling like something new might grow if it were given the chance. Evelyn rode out most Sundays, not always stopping, not always staying long, sometimes just passing the fence and watching the way the field moved under the sky. But she stopped more often than she meant to. They didn't talk much. Sometimes he worked while she sat on the rail, the gloves he'd given her resting beside her on the wood. Sometimes she helped, holding wire steady while he twisted it into place. Once he handed her a hammer without asking, and she drove 3 nails in before he took it back. No praise, no correction, just work. It felt even. That was the word she settled on. Even. Until the day it wasn't. It started with a man named Duke Harlan, He came into the office late, pushing the door open harder than necessary. His boots were polished in a way that didn't match the rest of him. Too clean. Too deliberate. He dropped a folded invoice on Evelyn's desk. "This is wrong," he said. She didn't look up right away. She finished the line she was on, set the pencil down, then opened the paper. "What's the issue?" she asked. "All of it," he said. "Weights off. Charges don't match." Evelyn turned the ledger toward herself and began checking the entries. "They match the manifest," she said. "They match what you wrote," he answered. She ran her finger down the column, stopped, checked the total again. "Weight's correct," she said. "You were charged by the ton, same as everyone." He leaned forward, one hand flat on the desk. "I've been hauling longer than you've been holding that pencil," he said. "I know when I'm being overcharged." Evelyn met his eyes. "Then show me where it's wrong," she said. A few heads turned. Duke hesitated just long enough for it to be noticed. He tapped the page with one finger. "Right there." Evelyn turned the ledger around so he could see. "Walk me through it," she said. He didn't. He started to speak, stopped, then shifted his weight. "That's not the point," he said. "It is if you want it corrected." The room went quiet. Boots on the floor stilled. Someone set a cup down softer than they needed to. Duke straightened. "I'm not paying that," he said. Evelyn closed the ledger. "Then it stays on your account," she said. Simple. No edge to it. No apology either. The door opened behind him. Gideon stepped in. He took in the room in one glance. The tension. The way Duke stood too close to the desk. The way Evelyn's hand rested flat on the ledger like she wasn't going to move it. He didn't step between them, didn't raise his voice. He just spoke. "Her numbers are cleaner than yours," he said. That was all. Duke turned, caught off guard more by the calm than anything else. "You got something to say, Hale?" "I said it." Another pause. Then Duke picked up the paper, folded it sharp, and shoved it into his coat. "Fine," he muttered. "We'll settle it later." He left without looking back. The room breathed again. Evelyn opened the ledger and went back to her work. Gideon stepped up to the desk like nothing had happened. "Feed order," he said. She nodded once, took the paper and wrote it in. When she handed him the receipt, their fingers didn't touch. But they didn't pull away too fast either. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying dust down the street. Inside, the numbers stayed where they were. Right. And harder to ignore than they had been before. The tension didn't leave the office when Duke Harlan walked out. It stayed in the corners. In the way voices dropped half a notch. In how men stepped in, signed their names, and stepped out again without lingering like they used to. Evelyn kept her seat. She finished the entries in front of her, closed the ledger, and set it aside. Her hand rested there a moment longer than it needed to, flat against the worn leather, as if making sure something stayed steady. Harold Finch came in from the yard, wiping his hands on a rag. "He give you trouble?" he asked, nodding toward the door Duke had gone through. "Not more than he could prove," Evelyn said. Finch grunted. That was enough for him. But it wasn't enough for the town. By evening, the story had already changed shape. By morning, it had grown teeth. It wasn't said loud, not where she could hear it plain, but it moved through Red Hollow the same way dust did. Quiet, constant, getting into everything whether you wanted it or not. And with it came another name. Silas Rourke. Evelyn heard it first from a driver out of the north route, a man who talked more than he needed to when the road had been too long. "Rourke's been buying up land," he said, leaning on the counter. "Anything near the water lines. Says there's talk of a new irrigation cut coming through. Evelyn kept writing. Who's selling? She asked. Folks who can't afford not to, he said. Or folks who don't want trouble. He tipped his hat and left before she could ask more. That afternoon, a man in a clean coat stepped into the office. Not dusty like the drivers. Not tired like the hands. Clean. That was the word. He removed his gloves finger by finger, slow, deliberate, then set them on the counter like he was placing something of value. Miss Brooks, he said. He didn't ask. Evelyn looked up. Yes. Silas Rourke, he said, as if that should settle something between them. It didn't. She nodded once. What can I do for you? He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. I've been hearing about your work, he said. Accurate. Efficient. I keep the books, she said. That's what I mean. He slid a folded paper across the counter. Take a look, he said. Evelyn opened it. Numbers, land measurements, water access points, notes written in a careful, practiced hand. This isn't freight, she said. No, Silas answered. It's opportunity. She said nothing. I'm acquiring land in this valley, he continued. Smart investments, places that will matter in a year, maybe two. He leaned in slightly. Some of those places need clarification, boundaries, productivity, things that can be reflected on paper. Evelyn closed the document. You want me to change numbers, she said. I want you to reflect reality, he corrected, still calm. That's not what you're asking. His smile held, just a fraction tighter. You're a practical woman, Miss Brooks, he said. You know how things work. Land isn't kept by sentiment. It's kept by what it produces. She didn't answer. He tapped the paper once. That ranch south of here, he said. Hale's place. Evelyn's fingers stilled just for a second. Not much cattle for the acreage, Silas went on. Plenty of land doing nothing. She met his eyes. It's not doing nothing, she said. He watched her for a long moment. Then he smiled again, softer this time. Think about it, he said. There's a place for you in this. Better than keeping books for someone else. He left the paper on the counter. Evelyn didn't touch it again until he was gone. That evening, she folded it once and placed it in her drawer. She didn't mention it to Finch. She didn't mention it to anyone. Sunday came. The sky held low clouds, thick and gray, the kind that pressed the land down without breaking into rain. The wind carried the smell of something waiting to happen. Evelyn rode out anyway. The road felt longer this time, not because of distance, because she knew what sat folded in her drawer. When she reached the ridge, the field was still there, color against dust, steady, unmoved. She didn't stop at the gate right away. She watched from the road, one hand resting on the saddle horn, eyes tracing the line of the fence. Then she turned in. Gideon was already there. Not at the fence this time, in the field. He moved slower than she had seen before, bending, lifting, pressing something into the soil. The rows nearest the barn looked uneven, broken, not ruined, but disturbed, as if something had passed through without care for what it stepped on. He didn't look up when she approached. He knew she was there. Evelyn dismounted, tying Duchess without speaking. She walked into the field, careful where she placed her boots. Up close she could see it clearer. Stems bent at sharp angles, patches where the color thinned. Tracks, faint but there, cutting through the rows. Cattle? She asked. Gideon shook his head. No. That was all he said. He pressed another plant into the ground, firming the soil around it with both hands. Evelyn stood there watching. "You going to tell me?" she said after a while. He kept working. "No. Not sharp. Not defensive. Just no." She let out a breath she hadn't meant to hold. "You don't ask for help," she said. He paused then, just long enough to mark the words. Then he went back to the soil. "I didn't say that," he answered. "You didn't say anything." He stood up slowly, wiping his hands on his shirt. The wind moved between them, carrying the scent of crushed stems. "I don't ask for things people don't choose," he said. Evelyn looked at him. Really looked. "You think I wouldn't choose it?" she asked. "I don't think for you," he said. Silence settled hard. Not like before. This one had weight. Evelyn nodded once, sharp. "All right," she said. She turned back toward the gate. He didn't stop her, didn't call her name, didn't take a step forward, just stood there in the field, hands empty now, watching her leave without reaching for anything. Evelyn mounted up with more force than necessary, pulling the reins tighter than Duchess needed. The mare shifted under her. She didn't ease it. She turned toward the road. At the gate, she paused. Just for a second. Then she rode out. The sky broke open an hour later. Rain came hard and fast, flattening the dust, turning the road to dark mud beneath the hooves. Evelyn didn't slow. By nightfall, she was back in her room above the office, boots still damp, coat hanging heavy by the door. She stood at the window, watching the rain streak the glass. Downstairs, the ledgers waited. In her drawer, the paper with Silas Rourke's offer sat folded and quiet. Somewhere out past the ridge, a man stood in a field of flowers that had been stepped on and was planting them again without asking who had done it. Evelyn rested her hand against the window frame. Then she stepped back. She pulled her bag from under the bed, packed what she had taken out, folded the rest without thinking too much about it. By the time the rain slowed, the room looked the same as it had the day she arrived. Clean, temporary. At dawn, she saddled Duchess. No note left behind, no explanation owed. She rode out of Red Hollow before the town had fully woken, the boards still quiet under her horse's hooves. At the edge of the road, she didn't turn toward the ridge. She kept going. Not because she didn't care, because she didn't know where she stood, and she wasn't going to stand anywhere she hadn't chosen. The field stayed behind her. The man stayed behind her. And the space they had made without naming it. She left that too. For now. The road bent east for a while, then south, then lost its shape altogether where wagon tracks crossed and faded into open ground. Evelyn let Duchess choose the pace. The mare knew how to settle into distance without being asked. By midday, the sky cleared. Rain from the night before had soaked into the earth just enough to darken it, not enough to soften it. The wind came back dry, as if it had been waiting. Evelyn didn't look behind her. She told herself that twice, maybe 3 times. By afternoon, she reached a narrow crossing where the trail dipped toward a shallow creek. Not much water, just enough to slow a horse and give a rider a reason to rest. Someone was already there. A man stood by the bank with a rolled map in his hand, boots planted carefully on the firmer ground. His horse grazed a few yards off, reins trailing. He looked up when she approached, lifting one hand in greeting. "Afternoon," he said. Evelyn nodded. "Afternoon." She led Duchess to the water, letting her drink before stepping aside. The man watched her a moment, then glanced at the saddle, the road dust, the direction she'd come from. "Red Hollow?" he asked. "Yes." "Passing through?" "Something like that." He gave a small smile, not pressing it. "Name's Thomas Keene," he said. "Land office, out of Bismarck." Evelyn paused, one hand resting on the saddle horn. "Surveyor?" "Clerk, mostly. I carry papers where they need to go." He tapped the rolled map against his palm. "Lot of changes coming through this territory," he added. "Lines getting redrawn. Ownership shifting." Evelyn said nothing. He unrolled the map halfway, holding it open against the breeze. "Hard to keep track of what belongs to who anymore," he said. "Unless it's written clear." Her eyes moved to the paper without meaning to. Shapes of land. Faint lines marking boundaries. Notes written in the margins. One section caught her attention. A narrow stretch along a fence line, marked differently than the rest. "What's that?" she asked. Keene followed her gaze. "That?" he said. "Mixed-use designation, crop and grazing." Evelyn's fingers tightened slightly on the leather. "That's unusual out here," she said. "Not if a man's thinking ahead," Keene replied. "If you can prove the land's producing something besides cattle, it changes how claims get reviewed. Makes it harder for someone to argue it's being wasted." He rolled the map closed again. "Seen a few folks try it," he went on. "Most don't stick with it long enough to matter." Evelyn looked back at the creek. The water moved slow, steady, like it had been doing that long before anyone thought to measure it. "And the ones who do?" she asked. Keene shrugged lightly. "They keep what's theirs." The wind shifted. For a second, it carried something with it. Not a smell, a memory, color against dry earth. Evelyn exhaled slowly. "Thank you," she said. Keene tipped his hat. "Safe riding." She mounted without another word. This time she didn't let Duchess choose. She turned the mare back the way she had come. The ride felt different. Not shorter, clearer. The ridge came into view near sunset. The field was still there. Even from a distance she could see where it had been disturbed. Patches of uneven color. Lines that didn't follow the curve they once had. Evelyn didn't slow. She rode straight through the gate, swung down before the horse had fully stopped, and left the reins loose. Gideon was where she had left him, not in the same place, but doing the same thing. He knelt near the edge of the field, pressing soil around a newly set plant. His hands moved with that same steady patience, like he wasn't working against anything, just continuing something that had already been decided. He looked up when she stepped closer. No surprise. Just recognition. Evelyn didn't speak right away. She moved past him into the row and crouched down, pressing the earth around a bent stem the way she had seen him do it. The soil was still damp from the rain. It held. Gideon watched her a moment. Then he reached for another plant and set it into place beside her. They worked like that for a while. No questions, no explanations. Just the quiet sound of hands moving through dirt, the wind passing low across the field, carrying what color remained. After a time, Gideon stood and walked back toward the fence. He returned with something in his hand. A small cloth bundle. He held it out. Evelyn looked up at him. "What is it?" she asked. "Seeds," he said. She took them. They were light, dry, ordinary. "They won't grow unless you stay," he added. The words settled between them. Not heavy, just true. Evelyn turned the bundle over once in her hand. "I didn't leave because I didn't care," she said. Her voice stayed level. "I left because I thought I didn't matter." Gideon didn't answer right away. He looked out across the field, then back at her. "You matter if you choose to," he said. No more than that. No promise tied to it. No claim. Just the space for an answer. Evelyn stood slowly. The wind moved again, catching the edge of the field, lifting what was still standing. She looked at the rows, at the places where they had been broken, at the places already set back into line. Then she stepped forward and knelt again, pressing another plant into the soil. This time, she didn't stop after one. Gideon moved beside her, not closer than he needed to, but not keeping that extra step of distance either. The light shifted toward evening, gold along the edges of the land. By the time the sun dropped behind the ridge, the broken line had begun to hold again. Not perfect, but enough. Evelyn stood, brushing the dirt from her hands. She didn't look at the road. She didn't look back toward town. She stayed where she was. The field stretched out in front of her, color against a land that didn't ask for it. And for the first time since she had seen it, she didn't feel like she was passing through. She felt placed, not claimed, not held, chosen. The wind moved low across the flowers, and this time she didn't follow it away. Somewhere between the first time she stopped and the moment she chose to stay, nothing about the land had truly changed. The soil was still hard. The seasons still came without asking. The world still moved the same way it always had. What changed was quieter than that. A man who never asked learned to leave space for someone to choose. A woman who had learned to stand alone realized that choosing to stay didn't make her smaller. It made her part of something she could shape. The flowers didn't prove anything to the world. They didn't argue. They didn't defend their place in that dry ground. They just kept growing. And maybe that's what a real kind of love looks like out there. Not loud, not claimed, just steady enough to stand through weather and patient enough to let someone walk away and still find their way back. If you had been in her place, would you have kept riding, or would you have turned back? And if this story stayed with you a little longer than you expected, there are more roads like this ahead, more quiet choices, more lives unfolding one small moment at a time. You're always welcome to ride along.